The first time that I heard of CJD was in July of 2010.
It was in October of 2011.
December of 2000.
July 17th, 2012. The day of the diagnosis. The day of the diagnosis.
Prion diseases, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, are a family of diseases that affect the brain, and they can occur among animals and humans. In humans, the most common prion disease is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
In April of 2013, my mom died from CJD about 3 months after she was diagnosed. From her hospital bed, she asked me to fight for her.
So, Mom, I'm gonna post this because there's people all over the world that care about you. And you're an inspiration, okay? I love you.
Hi, Trevor. It's Mom. We're at the campground at the Dunes in Orange County. We'll be here through Saturday. Give me a call when you have a chance. Love you. Bye.
Mary Sue Riffle was born in 1945 in Niles, Michigan. She was the fifth of 7 girls. When she was 4 years old, her parents bought their first house. It had 1 bathroom. After graduating high school, she moved to Milwaukee and got a job with Allstate Insurance. That is where she met my dad. They were married in 1965. They had 2 sons, my older brother Gary and myself. Unfortunately, my parents divorced in 1991. She remarried in 1994 and became a grandmother in 1998. These voicemails are the last memories of my mom before this cruel disease began to steal away everything that we take for granted. She was on a cross-country RV trip, visiting all of her grandkids. She felt and looked good. She returned home to Florida. It was September when she started feeling off. The doctors began a series of tests, but they couldn't come up with any answers.
CJD can be difficult to diagnose, especially in the earlier stages of the disease. It can mimic other diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, or any number of other dementing disorders, because dementia is one of the primary symptoms of the illness.
Depending where it starts, it can look like a lot of other diseases. It can look like other neurodegenerative diseases. It can look like Alzheimer's. It can look like toxic diseases. It can look like MS. It can look like aphasia or language disorders. It can look like Parkinson's disease and related neurodegenerative diseases. So I call it the great mimicker because of that. It can look like so many other diseases, which sometimes makes the diagnosis pretty difficult.
He quit working. His job kind of let him go. He is a parts manager, lots of parts numbers. He started forgetting the parts. One of the girls we know that does parts too, she called for a carburetor kit, something. And when he come back on the phone, he talked to her about something totally different. So John's always a practical joker, so she thought he was jacking with him, but he couldn't remember.
My mom had just gotten, like, rapidly ill. And the symptoms at the beginning of that year were just sort of a mixed bag of seemingly minor things. Her vision was blurry. She was a little bit more forgetful than usual. She got into, like, a sort of weird car crash where there seemed to be just sort of like a bad judgment call that no one could explain.
She was just telling me about, you know, some doctor's appointments that she had and how she had to go in for an MRI because she had been falling a lot. And she was concerned about, you know, what direction her health was going in.
It starts out with someone coming home from work and they drive back by their house and they've forgotten where their house was, and they end up in you know, another neighborhood and been lost. It's just sort of out of the blue. They didn't have any other problems. And then we see this is just completely, day by day, this keeps getting worse. They have memory problems. They start having, it's problems dealing with numbers, calculating, doing some of those things. Daily routines and things that they used to do all the time, they're starting to have trouble doing.
At first in March, they thought he had Parkinson's disease. So I couldn't get any answers from the doctors around here. I'm not shy. I kept saying, we're gonna find this, John. We're gonna find out what's wrong. So I called the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, and I got hooked up with a specialist that specializes in that. So when she was the one that diagnosed John with CJD, and you stop and think, my gosh, how did it go from his feet and legs hurting and him walking to his head, to a fatal brain disease? So that was shocking.
Want me to help?
I think I can probably read it.
Let's see. Happy Valentine's Day. I miss you, Grandma. I hope you get better soon. I love you, Kim, with lots of hugs and kisses.
There's so many doctors that just don't know because they've never seen it before. And so you deal with that.
In a patient with a suspected prion disease diagnosis, they could have several key symptoms. One would be ataxia, which is a muscular incoordination, myoclonus, which consists of involuntary jerking, and vision changes, which can manifest in several different ways. And of course, one of the key symptoms that is almost universal in these patients is dementia.
She was taken to a neurologist as her sort of like forgetfulness and confusion increased, and they didn't really know what was going on. Many things were sort of like tested for. She got a spinal tap done on the suspicion that maybe this was an early stage prion disease. It came back negative for the 14-3-3 biomarker of prion disease. They ruled it out, kept searching for other things.
There are certain ways we can make the diagnosis clinically of diseases like CJD. The EEG can sometimes show very specific abnormalities at the brainwave test. And then certain spinal fluid tests as well there are certain proteins that might be elevated. And then the MRI, in many cases of CJD, in most cases, it will show very specific abnormalities. There's more variability in the genetic forms. Not all genetic forms will have abnormalities. And we don't know when they begin, but we think that the abnormalities on MRI, in most cases, begin very early in the disease, possibly even before the first obvious symptoms.
Great. Hi, Gary. I hope you can hear me. I love you. I hope you're having a good time in California. Not too good. I have Trevor laughing at everything I say. Here's to you.
Nobody thinks it's CJD. It's just not what you think of. You think of everything else before you come to that conclusion. It's kind of what my mom went through, where they tested for everything. They thought it was they figured it was cancer because of the things that were happening and what they were reading in tests, but they couldn't find any cancer, and they couldn't find anything else wrong with her.
CJD becomes a diagnosis of elimination. So we really have to rule out every other disease that is more common than CJD before we can even really come to that conclusion or thought that this is a prion disease. So that means you've gone through multiple tests. They're all coming back negative, or they're coming back normal, and nothing's wrong with you.
I still think she needs music. Music motivates people. I should have brought my Zuma.
You know what got her going yesterday was that Coke.
I know. I said, yeah. I'm gonna get me some Coke. I'm gonna fix her some Coke too. We're gonna
yes. When she had that Coke,
she did. She was on that sugar high.
She was on that sugar high.
I don't remember that.
Well, I don't ever see you eating sugar, so to speak, so.
You don't?
No. Drinking that Coke just really made you energetic.
Yes.
And if it wasn't on my grandfather's death certificate, I don't know how long it would have taken them to say, maybe it's CJD.
This is such a complicated disease. It has no relevancy to what we know as human beings. It's not cancer. It's not AIDS. It's not a disease that has been explored and taken apart and put back together again. This is a disease that every time you come up with answers, it morphs into something else.
What are you having trouble doing that you really want to do?
I want to walk.
Yeah,
I want to ride a bike.
yeah.
Yeah. And I hope to do it soon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Her spirit was strong throughout, you know, and she kept even saying, you know, I just want to walk again. I want to walk again.
So I gotta go home today. You know that, right?
Goodbye.
That's all you're gonna say? Goodbye?
You could stay here.
I know, but I have to go home for a little bit.
Why?
Gotta go to work.
Yeah, I gotta go take care of Reese, go back to work for a little bit, but I'm gonna come back.
I hope so.
Yeah,
Yes. As long as you come back.
I'll come back.
Okay.
What are you gonna do while I'm gone?
Sleep.
You're gonna sleep? You're gonna rest?
Yes.
Exercise.
Exercise.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, because what do you want to do?
Walk.
Yeah.
Walk.
The progression of these diseases is a hockey stick. They start off really very, very slowly, probably early on, and we really don't even know for sure when they start or how to detect them at that stage. And then they reach a certain stage where they really do begin to turn up like the hockey stick. And the rapidity, the slant on that hockey stick varies from the disease to disease. So you're going along very slowly like this, and then all of a sudden somebody says, oh, that looks kind of weird. And so in prion diseases, it kind of goes up like that when you see it. In Alzheimer's disease, however, it kind of goes up a bit more like that. And then Parkinson's disease is probably even a little bit lower. But they all go up.
Her decline was just so rapid that by March, she was like too confused to really carry on a conversation properly. By May, she wasn't really talking coherently at all. And she had lost so much muscle mass that she couldn't stand or walk, she couldn't balance.
At the end of disease, there is this progression towards what they call an akinetic mutism. And so this is where the body just doesn't move. It's like there's not a will to move the body. And the person's alert, it's not in the coma, they're alert, but they can't speak.
You gonna smile pretty for me? You got a smile for me? Yeah. How's my mom? How's my mom? You wanna say hi to Gary?
So I watched the very rapid decline over those several weeks of her losing the ability to walk on her own, take care of herself, go to the bathroom and prepare her own food, and eventually led to, she was no longer able to speak anymore in the very end.
The bad news about this disease is that it's always fatal, usually within 1 year. What we found is that almost 80% of cases die within 1 year, almost half of those within 6 months. We do have outliers that may survive a little bit over a year or even longer in some familial cases, but the end result, unfortunately, is always the same.
You can't say the wrong thing to a family. You can't say, oh, they're gonna die. That's why we're fortunate that we have people like Brian Appleby or Jim Law or Michael Geschwind who know and are wonderful human beings and sympathetic and empathetic in every way.
When we give somebody a diagnosis of prion disease, we don't want to be wrong because we're giving somebody a death sentence because we have no treatments, no cures.
Once my mom passed and we confirmed familial CJD, I knew I had to help in any way I could. I'd been in touch with the University of California at San Francisco when we hoped to get my mom to see some prion disease specialists. They do full clinical research testing for people at high risk of prion disease. I rushed to get an appointment as soon as possible and made sure it was okay to bring my camera with me to document as much as I could. I wanted to share as much as I could with the rest of my family.
There's no measure of hope. There's no diagnosis, no treatment, no cure. We need research. We need to get some answers.
So yeah, I'm going to UCSF Tuesday. I have to be there at 7 a.m. All right, so I'm at UCSF Memory and Aging Center.
All right, so we're gonna go over the consent forms for the study today. We're gonna start out by just talking a little bit about the research more generally and what we're looking for. So Dr. Michael Geschwind has been the primary investigator on this study. He's been doing studies on human prion disease and CJD for the past 15 years or so.
They have information on my mom already, but they want everyone in the family to do it.
The current grant that we're working on is called Early Diagnosis of Human Prion Disease. And so what we're looking for, as I'm sure you're aware of, is the earliest signs of change in people who have prion disease or people who have the genetic mutation that causes genetic prion disease. Currently, there aren't a whole lot of good ways to diagnose CJD, and as you have experience with, people are often quite sick by the time they get a correct diagnosis. So we're especially interested in looking at people who are at risk for a genetic prion disease, who know they have the mutation, and then we also do see people who are symptomatic both for genetic and sporadic prion disease. And we're mainly looking for uprated and downregulated proteins in the spinal fluid or blood, changes on MRI, and any other changes we might be able to see through the tests that we do over the next 2 days.
2 days of testing. Basically, what I'm realizing is it's all the testing that my mom went through when they were trying to figure out what was wrong with her, because they're gonna do CT, MRI, spinal tap, and other stuff, and then blood tests, and the blood test is is the genetic test, but that takes weeks. But the other stuff, they basically just get a basis of like what my brain is doing and what my body's like.
Right after this, you'll be having a brain MRI. The strength of the magnet is 3 Tesla. And what that means is usually if you had an MRI in a hospital, it'd be 1.5 Tesla. So this is a much stronger magnet. The other MRI that you won't be having is 7 Tesla, so it's even stronger than that. That's just a research MRI. There are very few 3 Tesla machines around the country and maybe a handful of 7 Tesla machines.
The brain scan can show the deterioration, because essentially what the CJD does is it creates holes in your brain. Basically the big breakthrough that this UCSF professor and won the Nobel Prize for, Stanley Prusiner, he developed the prion theory. Prion is a protein that has changed.
You have a couple of normal proteins that look like this. They're going around. They have a three-dimensional structure that's really important to what they do. And then, perhaps spontaneously, perhaps otherwise, one of these proteins goes bad and it goes to a form that no longer functions and can cause some damage. Now, that happens in prion diseases, and it happens in other diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease.
These proteins can fold in an incorrect manner, And for whatever reason, that misfolded protein causes other proteins to misfold as well. And so they continue to accumulate, and this process of accumulation leads to a deterioration of the brain, essentially.
For the last 25 or 30 years, we've known in prion diseases, protein like this, it goes bad, it meets a normal protein and causes it to go bad. And then those two go off and meet another normal protein and cause another one to go bad, and you get a chain reaction going on. And that's a very important difference in how this is happening. And it makes a big difference in how you might approach dealing with the disease.
From my understanding, and again, I'm going to learn a lot more when I go up there and they're going to explain things to me, but depending on where it starts, it'll affect how your body responds to it. So if it starts in the memory area of your brain, you're going to lose your memory first. If it happens in motor functions, you're not going to be able to walk and do things. If it starts with sight, you may not be able to see. You know, it just depends on where in the brain the holes begin, because then the brain can't function where the holes are. It seems pretty simple in theory. The question is, why do the proteins decide to change into prions and become something different? And how do you stop them from doing it?
Either this evening or tomorrow morning, depending on their schedule, you'll have an EEG. Have you ever had one of those before?
I'm actually not sure if I
So
have.
that's the one where they put kind of this sandy glue on an electrode, and they glue them to your scalp, and then they kind of wrap them up so they stay in place.
Right.
And then you sit there for about an hour and a half, and they're measuring the electrical activity of your brain. So one of the things that is an indicator of CJD in some people is kind of these slow, sharp waves. That usually only happens toward the end of the disease course in people who are already sick, but we get an EEG on anybody who comes in again, just looking for any change at all.
Sure.
Then a little later today, you'll have some neuropsychological and cognitive testing with my coworker Sven, who you'll meet in a little bit. That basically is a series of questions. Some of them will be very easy, some of them will be a lot more challenging.
What season is it right now?
Summer.
And
or baseball season.
Yes, exactly. My favorite season.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to kind of get a baseline of where you're at cognitively right now.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, there'll be a blood draw. That'll be when we get to the hospital later this afternoon.
Yeah. They will do the same blood tests that my mom did, that we found out that she had the genetic marker, the mutation. They can do that test and not tell me. Obviously, it's up to me whether or not I want to know. And they discourage people from learning, because it can, either way, it can affect you. Started with an MRI. Next is cognitive testing.
Where are we right now?
In general, it's University of California, San Francisco. I believe we're at the Memory and Aging Center.
Right. What floor of the building are we on right now?
We're on the first floor.
And what city are we in?
In San Francisco. So far, everyone's great. This is what you would go through, and they'd be looking for stuff if I was symptomatic at this point, but I'm not. Don't even know that I have it.
What is this?
That is a pen.
And what is this?
That is a watch.
I'm gonna say a phrase and I want you to just repeat it back to me, okay? No ifs, ands, or buts.
No if, ands, or buts.
I want you to take this piece of paper in your right hand, fold it in half, and place it on the table. Great. And can you read this and do what it says?
Close your eyes.
And you can open it.
Can you read this?
I can't see a thing.
Can you read it now?
I can't see a thing.
I'll bet you can read it now.
If you look inside my mind, you're gonna find a lot of useless cartoon references. I don't know why I have these things stored in my memory, but I do. I can remember the names of Seinfeld characters better than people I meet. So when the cognitive tests focused on my short-term memory, it becomes nerve-wracking. But I can't begin to imagine what it's like for a dementia patient to feel like every moment is a test like this.
So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to read a list of words to you, and I'm going to read it to you several times. And after each time that I read it to you, I want you to tell me as many words as you can from the list. And don't worry about what order they're in, just try to get as many as you can, okay? So, truck, spinach, giraffe, bookcase, onion, motorcycle, cabinet, zebra, subway, lamp, celery, cow, desk, boat, squirrel, cabbage. Go ahead.
Cabbage, boat, horse, onion, spinach, cabinet, desk, that damn swallow keeps packing. Yeah, that's probably what I'm good for right now.
Okay.
After rewatching this test, I remembered a video I took of my mom. She struggled with seemingly easy questions and even began to guess when I pushed her.
Who did I have lunch with today?
Who did you have lunch with today?
Did I have lunch with your sisters today?
Yes,
Which ones?
Helen and Barbara.
No.
Helen and Pat.
Well, Pat was there.
Pat.
Because Pat lives here, right?
Pat lives in Illinois.
No, Pat lives in Florida.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she lives in your house. Not where you live, but you own the house that she lives in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And did another sister come down to visit you?
Barbara and Helen and Judy. I think that's all.
Didn't one of your younger sisters come to visit?
Wendy. Yes, Wendy.
No.
Kay?
Kay.
Well, Kay came down to
Yeah.
visit me, yes.
She knew all of her sisters' names, but she couldn't remember who visited her the day before. She knew I was taping her and quizzing her, so she put up a brave front, but it had to be terrifying. I was scared trying to remember random objects from a list. This was her life.
You've had enough. Okay. We'll say bye to Gary.
Bye, Gary.
Okay.
It's nice talking to you.
Yeah. It's definitely official. I'm in the hospital.
I waited for my next round of tests, but I didn't have the anxiety of waiting for a doctor to tell me what was wrong with me. Still, I couldn't help but think of my mother. What did she think when she went through this?
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm Dr. Raquel Gardner.
Okay. Touch my finger with your index finger and touch your nose. Go back to my finger.
The physical tests reminded me of the videos I saw of patients diagnosed with CJD, except I could touch the doctor's finger and then my nose.
Fist. Side of the hand. Can you do that so?
I was watching the video of the doctor test my motor skills and began to think that no one would be interested in this. That was until I saw a Parkinson's patient go through the same test in a documentary. That's when it hit me. Take the dementia of Alzheimer's and loss of motor skills in Parkinson's, and you start to understand CJD.
In prion diseases, we've known for a long time that the diseases can move from cell to cell. Researchers have found that the proteins that go bad in Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, they're not prion proteins, they're different proteins, but when they misfold and go rogue, as I sometimes say, it turns out that they can travel from cell to cell. This overlap can be extremely helpful in understanding more about prion disease, but also more about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And for the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's people, it gives a new way for them to look at that disease. So this mutual interaction is really good.
It's time to sit down with Dr. Geschwin for my in-depth lesson on prion diseases.
Human prion diseases, we tend to divide them into three types based on sort of how they occur. And the most common form is the spontaneous form, which we call sporadic CJD. And then the next most common are hereditary familial forms, which are about 10 to 15% of all cases. And then far less than 1% are acquired. The most common ones that people might know about today are variant CJD that people have gotten from exposure to BSE or mad cow disease. And the incidence of prion diseases are about 1 per million per year. So in a country like the US with over 300 million people, we would expect more than 300 cases per year. And we get that. We get anywhere from 250 to 400 a year, and it varies from year to year. There's just this natural variation. That incidence is across the entire age population, from infants up to the very elderly.
The statistics are 1 case per million per population worldwide. We don't believe that. We feel there's many more cases, that some cases are not diagnosed. Some patients are misdiagnosed, or families, there's no diagnosis. Then families look up symptoms online, and it could be post-mortem. Call us and say, I know this is what my loved one died of.
There's more prion disease than the numbers suggest. There's a lot of people who die who's, it's a horrifying process. It's a horrifying disease course and way to lose somebody. And not every family wants to have an autopsy, wants to pursue a diagnosis after that point.
The surveillance of this disease is critical. We need to know what's happening here.
Prion diseases can look really different from one another. And so it's not a clean sort of like bucket of symptoms. It's not a trivial thing to diagnose.
Because the prion diseases don't occur equally across the age spectrum, a person's lifetime risk of dying from CJD is much higher than the incidence of 1 per million per year.
Wait, what did he just say?
A person's lifetime risk of dying from CJD is much higher than the incidence of 1 per million per year. So if I looked at an individual and say, what's their lifetime risk of getting CJD, it's much higher than the incidence of 1.1 per million per year. So, and the way we calculate a person's lifetime risk is we look at deaths from CJD per year over total deaths. And that's how we sort of make that type of calculation.
According to the CDC's statistics, less than 2.5 million deaths occur each year. Since everyone dies at some point, and 250 to 400 will die from prion diseases each year in the United States, the complicated math is simplified. Because we are talking about an untreatable and incurable disease, 1 in a million doesn't hold up.
It is still a rare disease, there's no question about that. But if you look at a person's lifetime risk of dying from CJD, that 1 in a million doesn't really help.
My attitude, having gone through the year of my mom's illness, was these things are just too rare. Like, no one cares. There aren't even doctors who know about this.
If you don't have a loved one that experiences a random sounding disease, what's your incentive to learn about it?
I mean, there are a lot of bad ways to die, but my mom was 52. We had no idea what was going on. And I didn't know a lot of people who could relate to that. And then to be put in this like genetic testing situation was like, I think a lot of people didn't know how to think about it. They were looking at me and saying, but you're healthy, and like, everything seems like it's fine.
We'll talk a little bit about the genetics now. So genes are a part of your chromosomes. You get one part of the chromosome from your mom and one part from your father. And the chromosome is comprised of strands of DNA, very tightly wound DNA. This piece of DNA has thousands of genes in it, and the gene encodes a protein. The shape of a protein really plays a major role in how that protein functions. Most proteins fold, and they fold into a very specific shape, and that shape determines their function. And if that shape isn't correct, that protein won't work right. Or maybe not only won't it work right, it might actually cause harm. In sporadic disease, we think this is a spontaneous event. And in genetic forms of prion disease, there's an error in the gene, a mutation or an error, that makes this protein more susceptible to misfolding. Here's a model of where one parent is affected with a mutation. Prion disease, genetic forms of prion disease. So each child is 50% at risk.
The CJD mutation is a dominant gene, like brown hair or freckles. I have both. So I have a 50-50 chance of receiving the mutation because we know my mom carried it.
There are more than probably 40 mutations that are known to cause genetic prion disease.
It felt like a lot of odds were stacked against us because these diseases are so rare in the first place. Like, even looking at all prion diseases, not just FFI, like 1 person per million per year was not, it didn't rise to the level where this was like a strongly suspected diagnosis for my mom. So then it turns out to be prion disease. The odds of it being genetic, given that diagnosis, were like 10%, we think. So then it turns out to be genetic, and then my odds of having inherited the disease allele, 50%. And then it turns out that I did. So throughout the whole chain, it just felt like our luck was just incalculably bad.
If we find a mutation, we can say that with pretty high assurance, that person will die of CJD before they're going to die of something else.
Right.
There are those people who want to tell us that, you know, this isn't such a big deal. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. None of us knows what's going to happen to us. And I'm not that fond of that. I don't think we should make light of the fact that, you know, having this mutation versus not having it is like a 30-year difference in life expectancy. That's kind of a big deal, you know? So, yeah.
And I'm not less likely to get hit by a bus tomorrow because I have this genetic mutation. Those risks are all still the same for me, too. Yeah. So it's not like I made some like bargain with the devil where I'm immune to everything else and then I'm gonna die of this disease when I'm 50. Like, that's not a thing.
Sitting with Dr. Geschwin in the consultation, I had to really think about, again, what do I want to know? Do I want to know whether or not I carry the mutation or not?
It wasn't until we started talking to other people, family, friends, that we even realized, of course, there's the alternative to not get tested.
That never would have occurred to us.
Yeah.
I think we both were immediately, we have to know. There's a 50% chance we can just forget about this and never worry about it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or there's a 50% chance we could at least know and not be wondering.
Right. I think our feeling was, the question has now been raised, and nothing's gonna make that go away. We could choose to answer it or we could choose not to answer it, but we'll have this question with us for as long as we live.
It's been a crazy journey. It's been almost exactly a year since I came here this first time. I want to know. I know that I want to know.
had so many discussions about whether or not I need to know, and I do need to know. So today's the day. We're talking with Dr. Geschwin again. Now I get to find out.
So the point of this visit, obviously, is for you to get your genetic results. And we're going to open up the envelope, and we're going to find out at the same time what your results are.
By the way, I was telling them how you make me feel so comfortable about this. And, you know, it just makes the whole thing a lot easier. Because I want to know, you know, that's the whole thing. I want to know, and hearing it from somebody that I respect and trust and, you know, puts me at ease. So that's...
I'm glad to hear that. You know, it's hard for anybody sitting here and on both sides. I think we're ready to open the envelope if you're ready.
I have been ready for a while, so...
So you do have the mutation, the E200K, unfortunately, and it's 129V. So that means you have a somewhat unusual, there are very few people who have E200K with V on the same chromosome. That's a much smaller population than E200K with an M.